workflows. Sandy, I can see your screen now, so can you take it away?
Okay, thanks, Kim. I appreciate that. Again, Sandy Wickman. I'm based in the Austin, Texas office of Interdyne BMI. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to be with you today and talk about Workflow 2.0 and the deep dive into those. We have had lots of customers who've been very interested in what these workflows that are no longer dependent on SharePoint can provide to you in your GP environment. So lots of good information today. This will take you through some of the setup steps, and we'll look at our agenda here in just a second. There's one distinction that I would like to call out at the beginning because it comes up in every conversation around workflows, is that expense report workflows is not a part of the GP workflows with the exception of project accounting. So this is not, the workflows that exist currently are not necessarily for those of you who may want to have your staff turning in employee expense reports and have them routed with receipts to have them approved before they go into your GP ERP system. So just want to make note of that at the beginning. So our agenda for today is going to be looking at our available workflows. We're going to do a little bit of the workflow setup in GP in a demo environment. We'll look at transaction routing and the workflow logic. Then we'll look at the web client, web services, and email setup. And lastly, I've added a few slides to the end of my presentation today to look at GP 2015 R2 and GP 2016 to show you what's available to you to help entice you a little bit more towards getting that upgrade if you're not already on one of those two versions. So we'll start out by talking about our available workflows. What's available to you? Again, we are talking about GP 2015 R2 and GP 2016. So in the purchasing series, the first one that we have available is our payables batch approvals. So an entire batch of payables can go through an approval process. The payables transaction approvals. So typically these are exclusive of one another. You're either doing transaction approval or you're choosing batch approval, but there wouldn't necessarily be a reason to have a transaction approved and then save it into a batch and have it approved again. The purchase order approvals, purchase requisition approvals. So for those of you who may not be aware, requisitions are the precursor to purchase orders. So you may have a group of people who are currently writing out on sticky notes or in an Excel file the things that they need to order and then turning those into the purchase order department, purchasing department, for them to create the purchase orders for. So purchase requisitions are available through the GP system so that those users could have a limited license. Right? So there's an employee self-serve license that's available to allow those users to just do requisitions and route them to workflows. Then your purchasing department would transfer those requisitions into purchase orders. So it can save a good deal of steps on your purchasing department to be able to have requisitions in GP, and there are user licenses that are available to do that with that make it an inexpensive option for you to be able to add that to your current licensing. Those requisitions can go through that approval process if you choose. And then lastly on the purchasing is vendor approvals. So if you have some steps that you choose for your vendors to go through in order to qualify them to be used as a vendor in your organization, it's certainly possible to route them through an approval process internally to perhaps vet that they have got all of their credit information in place, that you've verified their reliability and so forth before you begin using them as a vendor. In the financial series, we have a GL batch approval. So if you would choose to have your general ledger transactions, general journal transactions saved into a batch, those again can be routed to someone to be able to approve that batch before they get posted. And I'm going to show you one of the new features that's available to you to be able to have those be in a Word template for the batch transaction list. So we'll talk about that towards the end. In the sales series, we have receivables batch approvals. In project accounting is where we have that expense report approvals and timesheet approvals. Again, those are specific to those of you who are using the project accounting functionality within GP. In the payroll workflows, I have several. So I have an employee profile approval. So an employee may be able to, again using that employee self-serve license, may have the opportunity to be able to go into their employee profile, which might include their emergency contacts, their dependents, and even their position history, and they may make changes in that employee profile, again in their emergency contact, and route that to your payroll department or your HR department to make sure that they've got the right information in the right places so that it will actually update your GP ERP system in payroll with the appropriate information. Employee skills approval, so skills, testing, education, they can make those updates and route them. Employee direct deposit approvals, so they can view and change their direct deposit information, maybe split things out between a checking account and a savings account, or could potentially stop their direct deposit if you chose to let them do that. Their employee time cards can be routed for approval before they go into GP payroll. And they could even be allowed to make their own W-4 changes. So if they needed to change the number of withholdings that they had because they had a change in their family, they can make that W-4 change and route that for approval as well. So those are the available workflows. So we have a couple of polls in our webinar today just to kind of get a feel for where you're at in terms of taking advantage of this new workflow functionality. So Kim, would you mind running our first poll for us?
You bet. All right, everybody. Do you use requisitions? Here we go. Let's go ahead and vote. All right, about 10% of you have voted. Got one choice, everybody. All right. Oh, Sandy's next to a train station, it sounds like.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. You're at a client site. We realize that. All right, getting ready to close this down. We got 67% of you have voted so far. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, with 73% voted, here we are. Not yet, but I am interested. It's about half the team. We got a good sized group here as well. Hopefully that takes care of that question.
Okay, are you able to see my screen again then?
We are.
Okay, thank you. So the next thing that we're going to talk about then is the workflow setups. And to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into my GP application and demonstrate for you how workflows are typically set up. So I'm demoing today from GP 2015 R2. Okay. So on my administration area page, so we use this section of our home page here to be able to change between area pages, and I've chosen administration. In the setup section of my administration under system is the first part of my workflow setup. Down about 3/4 of the way, here's the first workflow setup choice. This window is what allows me to be able to enable email for my workflows. So the checkbox at the top is to enable the email for workflows. So all of the workflows have the functionality to be able to route emails for approvals, and we'll look in a little bit about the kind of text that goes into the approval and what your approver might see as a part of that. This window is where we set things like the SMTP, which is the requirement for our mail server to set up the email address, the display name, and the server name. So these are good things that you would want to include your IT or your email provider in helping you determine whether you use Windows authentication to be able to do that with, and then email actions gives us the ability to be able to have those responses back from our approvers. There is a separate install that's necessary for you to be able to take advantage of that email approvals. It's called GP Web Services. So we at Interdyne would be happy to schedule with you to make sure that that gets installed and configured correctly to be able to allow that email approval to happen. And at the top of this window we have the ability to be able to test that email action and make sure that everything's working before we go on to the next sets of setup. Okay. Then as I scroll down a little bit further in my setup is where I do more of the by company setup for each of the workflows. So under the company section of my setup window, in this section here for workflow, I click the down arrow, it opens that workflow section. We're going to start by looking at the workflow calendar. The calendar gives us an ability to be able to create the days when the timing for being able to make a requirement for our workflows will be impacted. So if I've given my approver 8 hours to do a approval task, I don't want them to be penalized because it's over a weekend and we're not open on the weekends. So I'll uncheck Saturday and Sunday entirely. Those days are not work days for our environment. And then I can set up my start and end times for my typical Monday through Friday days or any other days that you want to have included in your work days. The non-workday section, on a year-by-year basis, right? So in this case I've got 2017 set up. I can indicate which days are not work days. So again, even though Mondays are a work day for us, if St. Patrick's Day falls on a Monday and we're not typically open that day, I identify that as a non-work day. It then gives that 8-hour time frame for that approver to take action, an extra amount of time to be able to take those actions during my designated work days. Okay, so workflow calendar. The second selection that I'll make from my setup administration workflow area is the email message setup. In this window, I get the opportunity to set up or use the existing messages that can go out to an email approver. There's a group of them that come delivered out of the box. So when I click on the looking glass, I have several that I could choose from. All the message IDs that start with WF are workflow. Right? So anything that is for a purchase order approval, I have an out-of-the-box approval message that could go to my email recipient, that it gives them the information in their subject line and within the body of the document. So on the PO approvals, the subject line will say you have a task assignment for purchase order, and then anything that's in the brackets means that it's going to fill in that value based on a field value on the purchase order. So it's going to say something like you have a task assignment for purchase order number 123. So really specific to the actual document that they're taking action on. Then within the body, again, we've got some of those same things where there's workflow step names called out, PO numbers called out, when the task deadline is due, and edit or view the document, be able to drill back into things if they're in GP and I have the user set up. So the body of the message can give us a whole bunch of additional details. Then even a section here with the document lines where I want to be able to review, display to my approver different information based on the line items that are on that purchase order. So again, within the body and within the document lines. This section here allows me to pick those fields that get inserted at the top, and I can have those replies sent to a specific user based on this message ID that I have chosen. So I may have multiple people creating purchase orders in my environment, in which case I may have an email address set up in my Active Directory to have my replies sent to pos@interdynebmi.com. So any of those email addresses that I have set up within my Active Directory can be selected in here so that when someone clicks reply, it goes back to that email address. Okay. So the message setup window is where I create these different message types. You can create new ones or you can use the ones with the star that are out of the box delivered to you. You also have a copy button here, so if you want to start out with the one that was for this PO approval, copy it and then be able to put your own adjustments into it so that you have one you can go back to. That's available to you as well. Okay. So we've covered 2 of the 3 actions here under my workflows. The next one is my workflow maintenance. So this is where I'm actually identifying the very specific parts of my workflows. Notice that workflow maintenance window opens to the purchasing series. If I click the down arrow, I can move up to financial, where I'll see the available workflow for my general ledger batch approvals, to sales for my receivables batch approvals. We'll skip purchasing because we're going to go back to that one. Under payroll, you see all the available ones that we looked at our slide for. For project. And then the administration one I believe was left available for them to be able to add new ones to going later on, or for you to be able to add your own unique ones within your environment. So if you have unique requirements for adding workflows, please do contact Interdyne. It is possible for us to be able to help you create unique workflows that don't exist out of the box for the ones that are available currently. So the first steps in creating a workflow is identifying the manager for that workflow. So today we're going to focus on the purchase order approval functions. So by highlighting purchase order approval, I now have a window here that shows the workflow type, the window that would be accessed, and the manager. The manager, this window actually, when you open it, actually shows this as a gray field. So those of us who've been users in GP for a long time would actually assume that this meant that this was not a field that we could actually make choices in. I'm going to jump back over here to the sales one to show you that this is the way it would show up initially, and it looks like we're not supposed to make an entry there, but that actually is not the case. In order for a workflow to begin, you need to choose a manager. The manager is the person that this would be escalated to if no one else had taken their approval steps or actions on things that had been done for any or all receivable batch approvals. So the manager may be set up to be the accounting manager, it might be your IT department. Who would be responsible if someone didn't take action on this workflow? So back over to our purchase order approvals, I have my manager set to GP admin. The way you make that selection is clicking the looking glass. The find in this window is actually looking at your Active Directory users. That's how we can make these workflows available to email activities instead of just your GP users. So it's looking for Active Directory users. So if I started typing my name and clicked the binoculars, it would actually go into my Active Directory and find my name in Active Directory, where I could then add that to my selected list of users by clicking on the Add button. So it doesn't have necessarily a looking glass where you go find Active Directory users. You actually have to know the names or the group and start typing that in order for it to find that for you. So once we have this set for our workflow type, Then I can click the plus next to the purchase order approvals in my purchase order approval workflow setups. And within this, I have two different ones that I've created. You can create as many different workflows for a particular type for for purchase order approvals as you like, but only one of them can be active at a time. So as you might imagine, you wouldn't want to have two different ones active at the same time because they might conflict with each other. So you can only have one available at a time. So this green check mark tells me that Sandy's test is the one that's active currently. If I decided that I wanted to have this one called PO be the active one, I can click on it here. This active button is what determines which of the two is the active workflow. And it's a toggle switch. It clicks on and clicks off. If I choose to make this the active one, when I try to save this workflow, I'll get an indication that I already have an active workflow of this type, so by activating this workflow, it will inactivate the other one. I say yes. Now this one's got the green check mark to indicate that it's the active workflow. So if I click the plus next to the Sandy's test, we're going to actually walk through how this Sandy's test one was set up, and then we'll look at some additional options that you have. Okay. So in this workflow name, actually I think what we'll do is create a new one. So I'm going to clear that. And we're going to start at the very beginning with a new workflow. So we'll call it new. We're a workflow name, and this one we'll call W. I have several options that I can take advantage of for this particular workflow. I may be able to send those notifications for completed actions. So that means that if you want the person who submitted into the workflow to be advised when it's approved, you can set that notification up by using the expansion button and have notify the originator on various things. When it's submitted, resubmitted, approved, task completed, if it gets recalled, or for the final approval. So very often we see the originator is advised when the approval happens, and again we have those message IDs that we can choose from, and we can even choose an Active Directory user to send a carbon copy to. Click OK. We can allow the approver to be able to delegate tasks. So very similarly to what you do when you're out of office, by setting your email with an out of office, you can have a different approver be delegated to do your approval tasks when you're out of the office and unavailable to be able to do those, as long as you choose this checkbox. Allow the originator to be an approver. In most environments you would not choose to do that, but because I'm the originator and I'm demoing, I need to mark that so that me as the originator, I can be an approver on that as well. You can choose to always require at least one approver, and you could choose a different person to be the alternate final approver. Then the next section, when a task is overdue, what action do I want it to take? Escalate to the next approver, escalate to a specific approver, or automatically reject it and send it back to the originator. So before I can go on to next steps, I have to save this workflow. Now my workflow is available to add the actual steps to. These buttons were grayed out until I saved that workflow. So now I can add my steps, and I can name the steps anything I choose to. So I might say that this is over $1,000. So I'm going to say that anything that is $1,000 or more is going to require approval for my step. The step type can either be approval or task. And then you determine the conditions, whether the action is always required or whether the action is required only when the condition is met. So by way of my step name, I'm saying a condition must be met to do that. So when I move the radio button, this box becomes available, and you access it by clicking on the expansion button. So I have some choices. I can say where a selected field is available in the condition. So I have a couple of different kinds of selections. The purchase order line conditions and the purchase order work. Purchase order work means the whole entire purchase order. Purchase order lines would be the individual line items. So in my case, I'm saying I want for my purchase order work subtotal is greater than and includes $1,000. Click on the Add button. That moves it into my conditions list. I can have a variety of additional conditions. They can be multiples, but I can only use that specific field once in the conditions list. This display extended field list gives me some extra fields that don't show there by default. Microsoft has sort of assumed a list of ones that you might choose. The display extended field gives you a greater list of those to be able to choose from. And you can compare fields. So if you wanted to be able to say the value of this field compared to the value of another field, that's where the field value comes in. Once I've got my conditions in place, I click OK. Then at the bottom, I'm actually doing my assignment. So who am I going to assign this step to? So when I click the looking glass, I get that same window that we looked at before where I'm going to type in the name, click Add, which moves it to the selected users, and click OK. Then I indicate my time limit. So you remember we looked at a calendar where I'm going to give them a calendar to apply that to. That's this checkbox, Apply the Workflow Calendar. So I indicate how many hours, how many days, or how many weeks this approver has to be able to take action on it. And then if I'm going to send the message, which message ID I want to choose. And I also have the ability to include the document attachments. Right? So that means that in my email is going to be whatever document attachments were on my purchase order are going to be to my approver in that email. So a really handy feature there. Then I click on Save Step. So I now have a Sandy W. purchase order approval workflow that has an over $1,000, and I could now choose to make that my active workflow as the Sandy W. workflow. Okay. So Kim, would you be available to run our second poll, please?
You betcha. All right, everybody, get your fingers ready, because here we go. Do you use GP for processing payroll and allow employees to have access electronically to payroll data? All right, Sandy, it looks like you're teaching people some things. A lot of people are picking not yet. I wasn't aware of it before this webinar. Good job. All right, so far about half of you have voted. Let's pick something out there, and I'm going to get ready to close down this poll. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, with 57% have voted. This is the answers. It looks like not yet. I'm interested and wasn't aware of it. So good stuff, Sandy. That's very promising. They're learning some new things. I can see your screen again.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is how we might choose to do the transaction routing. So what in my demo just now, we did a really simple routing of everything that's over $1,000. So in most cases, people have more complex requirements than just purchase orders over $1,000. So some of the logic tips that are available to you is if an or statement, that an or statement is exclusive. It's not able to be inclusive of other statements. So for those of us who use Excel, we can kind of look at a XYZ and say, we can't route for workflow based on X and Y and one of these three choices. It would be treated as X, Y, or Z, or Z2, or Z3. So best practice would be to say, choose for X, Y, or Z, or Z1 with X and Y, Z2 with X and Y. So some things you can think about, and this slide would be available for you to go back to and be able to say, how would I want to think about my logic in order to be able to roll it out to be useful. So in previous versions of GP, we did have some approvals that were available through the business portal. Since business portal isn't available any longer, we do want to make note that in that business portal you could set hard-coded approval limits, but you cannot do that in this current workflow. Instead, you have to route the workflow based on amounts on the document. The setup of workflow will vary based on whether or not you want sequential approvals or skip level approvals, and we're going to go take a look at that so that it'll make a little bit more sense once we see it on our actual workflows. The question would be, should the document go directly to the level approver or have to be approved by each approver in the chain? So back into my demo environment now, we're going to switch from our purchase order approvals to the purchase requisition approvals. And in this, I have several different choices, but the two I'm going to focus on are the sequential approvals for two different types of sequences. So in this sequential approval, what I have identified is 3 steps, a 500 step, a 750 step, and a 1,000 step. And in this choice, I would be saying, if it's a $500, I want you to route that to Mark Jensen for approval. If the requisition is less than or equal to $500. If it's less than or equal to $750, it goes to the GP admin for approval. And if it's less than 1,000, it goes to Sandy Wickman for approval. So that's an example of up to a certain amount, it's different people who are doing the approval process. In the sequential approval number 2, I've identified if it's 500, it goes to Mark. If it's 750, it goes to GP admin, and it goes to Mark. If it's 1,000, it goes to Sandy Wickman and GP admin and Mark Jensen. And the way that you identify this in this sequential tree kind of an environment is based on this field of our step. So this step as a first step would be marked for each one of these in this sequential approval. In the order for each of the other ones in this environment, this step follows a selected step, shows up in that box. So this step follows 500, this step follows 750, in order to make it be this tree approach. This would indicate then that each of those people would have to do the approvals in order for it to be final approved. Okay. So next we're going to talk about the web client, web services, and the email setup. So we noticed in that very first window of our setup that there's some SMTP server settings that are necessary. Those settings are server specific, so if you have multiple servers it would have to be set for each one of them, and must be provided by the Exchange admin for the environment. So there are some common email provider SMTP settings that you can usually find them online. I've provided 2 of the typical ones here for Office 365 and for Hotmail, but if you need to get them for other things, Gmail or others, they usually can be found by Googling or Bing online. And you can use that test email button to verify that the settings are correct. So web services can be installed to allow workflow approvals and rejections without needing to open GP. Right? To enable the approvals from anywhere, you have to set up a public DNS record to a static IP on your router. So again, some things that you'd want to get your IT folks involved with. And then in the Enable Email Actions area, you can set that DNS address and only check the HTTPS link if web services has been configured for that secure link. Those email message IDs that we looked at is what's going to determine what that email looks like when your approver receives that email. So what we set up, or what we looked at in that message ID, is what gives them this information. You've been assigned a task for the new workflow step called STEP, in this case, in the purchase requisition approval workflow for requisition number 4. The task deadline, and edit or view the document, and this is a link that can go back to GP to actually open the requisition if they are a GP user and can access GP. These are the action buttons. They can approve it or reject it. There's indication within the email of the company. So if you have multiple companies in your environment, you can have workflows for different companies, the document type, the requisition number, who it was requested by, the required date of the requisition items, the document date of the requisition, the document amount of the requisition, and then any of the comments. So when you're actually, doing a workflow, you get to put some comments into your submission or your approval, and those comments do show up on the email. Then this section is where I showed you in the setup where the line information can be revealed to your approver. So if they don't have GP user ID, you can still give them a good deal of information here by including those line details on the email body, and you can also allow them to open the document attachment if we check that box to include it. So there's a little bit of troubleshooting information here that might be useful to you if you need to have some assistance. We won't spend too much time there, but that slide's available to you if you need to come back and reference it. If you're using the web client, which is a screenshot that you see here, you'll need to authenticate to the remote domain after clicking the link in order to be able to put that comment in for your approval or rejection step. So I mentioned that we were going to see a little bit of the new functionality that's within the GP 2015 R2 and 2016. So the attachments that can now be sent with the workflow task notification, that was available as of 2015 R2. So that's that box that we marked that include those document attachments. Really great feature to be able to have your non-GP users be able to do the approvals, because you can now attach any of the purchase order documents with it so they can see that. Workflow new in GP 2016, so Word templates are now available for those batch approval workflows. So we had a GL batch, a payables batch, and a receivables batch. There's Word templates that you can make a part of that edit list. So you'd be sending that edit list as a Word template to the person who needs to do those approvals. Also in GP 2016, there's some additional condition management to be able to say 2 new conditions: continue to the next step or reject the workflow if the condition for the person that you'd sent this to is not available. So if the condition is not met, end the workflow path or reject it back to the person who originated it. In versions prior to GP 2016, it was possible that if the approver didn't take action and didn't have a delegate, that they could kind of get stuck, and then the owner of the workflow would need to go push them along. You can also have workflow reassignment notifications. So if they have a delegate approver, then that person could get those emails for a workflow that was delegated to them as an approver, part of an escalation process, or if they're the alternate approver. Okay, so before we start questions, Kim, could you run the last poll for us, please?
You bet. Hold on here. Everybody ready to go? Do you use workflows today for any of the available workflows? All right. Interesting. Not yet is a lot of the answers so far. All right, we're going to get ready to close this poll. 69% of you have voted so far. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. With about 3/4 of the folks, it looks like not yet, but I'm interested. So excellent, Sandy. It was great exposure of the possibilities. Anything else you want to add to this before I hide the results?
Nope, that sounds great. Thank you. Thank you for participating in those polls. Okay, so questions, or share your user experiences with how any of those of you who have started playing with setting up workflows. You have two choices. You can either type your questions in which case Kim will be able to see those questions and read them out for us, or you can raise your hand and she could choose to unmute you if you want to ask your question live.
Yep, just type in your name and I'll look for you and unmute you. All right, here is the first one from Ann. It is, in the future for some of these polls, one idea would be is just to add that I don't use this module. That's maybe why some folks didn't know for sure how to vote. It's a really good suggestion. All right, Angela asked the questions. We are getting ready to go live with NAV, and I will begin developing workflows at this time. Do you have a digital signature workflow? Okay, so this is a question about NAV. So again, Sandy is always working on presenting here on GP. I don't know, Sandy, if you know the answer to that or not.
I'm sorry, I don't.
All right.
I'm not expert level at NAV. I'm sure there are people at Interdyne who could certainly address your question, but I wouldn't be the one to do that.
And that would definitely be AJ. So Angela, what you'll want to do is email marketing@Interdyne.bi and say, please forward this question to AJ, and we'll get you that answer. Good to have you here. All right, the next question is, can the employee that the invoice is sent to apply a GL code to the invoice?
Not through workflow, no.
Okay, good to know. Any other questions? Again, you can put them in on the right-hand side as of right now. There are no other questions. And Sandy, workflow is something that's been pretty cool and talked about here now for the last couple of years. And yet a lot of folks are not jumping on board. And a lot of it has to do with getting it done for them. So again, Sandy and other folks within Interdyne BMI are available in setting up that first workflow. So do reach out to us so we'll be able to help you either through support at Interdyne BMI or marketing at Interdyne BMI. Let us know if we can help you out. And lastly, share this webinar recording following today's presentation. We're going to give you a hyperlink of that recording. Share it with somebody else. And if that sounds like something there you are interested in, reach out. We can just do a quick call with Sandy or someone on our team to give you kind of a ballpark and an explanation on how we would do it specifically for you. Sandy, are there other common questions that you've come across when it comes to workflow?
Sure. I'd like to show you then one additional thing. So since we have the time to be able to do that, we've talked about delegating tasks to other users. So as your bonus today, then I'd like to show you that that is entirely possible. So I'm going to go back to my home area page where I have access to my user preferences. So again, this is that functionality to say if I'm going to be out of the office and I'm a typical approver of certain things, I can open my own user preferences, go to the workflow delegation button, and be able to indicate that I'm going to automatically delegate my workflow tasks and who I might be delegating them to, and even a start and end date so that I could be able to manage that just for the period of my vacation. Click OK, and that would be saved for that delegation activity during the time that I was away and not available to do that. Okay, that's all I have for today, Kim.
Self off mute. Excellent. All right, everybody. Again, I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Sandy, as always, it's really fun listening to you and to learn. Thank you so much. And everybody, make it a great